Every morning, you join a growing family of listeners who rely on World for news analysis and encouragement. In fact, more than 300,000 people listen to World programs each month. That's a remarkable thing when you stop to think about it. Hundreds of thousands of people choosing reporting that takes truth seriously and that treats people fairly, and that remembers that God is sovereign over the news.
He is. During our June giving drive, we're asking, if you value that work, would you help sustain it? If you've not given yet, would you consider making a gift today? You can support World at wng.org/donate. Thank you for listening and for helping make this work possible. Good morning. Fighting the growing Ebola outbreak in Africa brings unique challenges.
Trust is the one thing you can't surge into a community during a crisis.
Also, a new policy aims to protect women's privacy in homeless shelters, plus the rise and fall of the Antiweaponization Fund. And a veteran astronaut explains how he fends off fear, even in a crisis.
Because if the Lord takes me to that level, I'm ready.
And world commentator Daniel Suhr on who will bear responsibility for so-called transgender procedures on minors.
It's Thursday, June 4th. This is The World and Everything in It from listener-supported World Radio. I'm Myrna Brown.
And I'm Mary Reichert. Good morning.
Up next, Kent Covington with today's news.
In Kuwait, an Iranian missile struck and killed at least one person, wounded dozens more, and damaged the country's main airport early Wednesday. It was a deadly blow against a key Gulf ally of the United States. Iran also attacked Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, but the Iranian missiles were intercepted there. The U.S. struck back at targets inside Iran, all of that once again testing a fragile ceasefire. Even so, President Trump confirmed reports that Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is personally engaged in peace talks.
He is giving approval because that's the way it has been for a long, long time. His father and then him, I guess it's a succession. But we seem to be getting along quite well.
U.S. and Israeli airstrikes killed Mojtaba's father, Ali Khamenei. Iranian state media claims that Tehran has cut off negotiations, but Trump calls that false and erroneous. The president also said he would like to meet face-to-face with Iran's supreme leader. Possible tension between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Media reports described a profanity-laced phone call that the president had with Netanyahu. Trump reportedly used the word stupid for Israel's continued attacks on the Lebanon-based terror group Hezbollah. And Trump told the New York Post's Pod Force One podcast.
I wouldn't say angry. I was a little bit perturbed at his constantly fighting with Lebanon. You know, at some point I said, we got to stop this. We got to stop it.
Israel accuses Hezbollah of repeatedly violating a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. Over the weekend, an Israeli soldier was killed and 3 others wounded in a Hezbollah drone attack in southern Lebanon after Israel expanded its operations there. During testimony before the House Foreign Relations Committee Wednesday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio laid the blame squarely at the feet of Hezbollah.
We are hopeful that we can create a paradigm in which Lebanon's government and Israel can work together to disarm Hezbollah and allow the people of Lebanon to reclaim its country. But it's complex.
Netanyahu agreed, accusing the terror group of firing missiles at civilians in Israeli cities, while at the same time hiding behind their own civilians in Lebanon. The prime minister also worked to smooth over differences with President Trump, telling CNBC.
And I have to tell you again, President Trump has been the greatest friend of Israel ever. We've never had such a friend in the White House. He's outstripped everyone.
Meantime, Iran continues to insist that before it will agree to any peace deal with the U.S., the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah must stop. On Capitol Hill, for the first time, the House has passed a measure aimed at ending the war with Iran.
On this vote, the yeas are 215 and the nays are 208. The concurrent resolution is adopted.
The resolution orders President Trump to pull U.S. forces out of the fight unless Congress votes to formally declare war. But the measure is largely symbolic. Even if the Senate were to pass it as well, the president could veto it, and it would take a 2/3 majority to override that veto, which is highly unlikely. Still, it was a rare crack in the Republican ranks. 4 Republicans broke with the president to join every Democrat in supporting the measure. President Trump wants a national security check on the most powerful artificial intelligence. World's Kristen Flavin has more.
The president signed an executive order Tuesday letting federal experts screen the most advanced AI systems for security risks up to 30 days before they reach the public. It is entirely voluntary right now. The order even bars the government from forcing any company to get a license before releasing a new model. But analysts say the big AI labs, Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google, will likely cooperate anyway to fend off the tougher mandatory rules that could come later. In return, they get early collaboration with the government's top cyber experts. The White House calls the light touch deliberate, as Trump doesn't want to slow what he calls America's AI lead over China. For World, I'm Kristen Flavin.
Votes are still being counted in California after Tuesday's primary election. But in Los Angeles, with a majority of the ballots now tallied, it still appears that incumbent Mayor Karen Bass is heading to a runoff against political newcomer, former reality TV star Spencer Pratt. Bass told her supporters,
"You know who I am. I have devoted my entire life to serving the city that I love, where I was born, and I'm going to continue to do that all the way to victory in November."
But Pratt says he's also feeling confident.
Again, Mayor Bass, this is the first time since 2005 an incumbent is going to a runoff. This is not a candidate that I'm too concerned about.
And in the California governor's race, Republican Steve Hilton and Democrat Javier Becerra are still the leading vote getters, likely to face off in November. I'm Kent Covington, and coming up, fighting the growing Ebola outbreak in Africa. And later, a veteran astronaut explains how he fends off fear even in a crisis. This is The World and Everything in It.
It's Thursday, the 4th of June. So glad to have you along for today's edition of The World and Everything in It. Good morning. I'm Mary Reichard.
And I'm Myrna Brown. First up, slowing the spread of Ebola. More than 300 people are infected with a rare strain of the Ebola virus in Central Africa. It's been about a month since the first case was confirmed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
The DRC's outbreak is already the second largest Ebola outbreak ever, but it is spreading faster than the largest outbreak did. World's Mary Muncie has the story.
Eddie and Ezo contracted the Bundaboyo strain of Ebola earlier this year. His symptoms started with vomiting and tingling. Then he was scratching from head to toe. Another survivor says he didn't think he would see his friends and family again. They went to a medical center that gave them medicine and tried to keep them comfortable, but they could only treat the symptoms and wait until they pulled through.
This is an outbreak of Ebola that's probably gone on for months, where we only began a global response in the past couple of weeks.
Tom Frieden is the president of Resolve to Save Lives, and he was the director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention during the Ebola outbreak in 2013 and 2014, the largest in history. He says the response that time started sooner.
There were about 40 or 50 cases by the time we began the response. This time, there are between 400 and 500 cases by the time the response is beginning.
Surging healthcare professionals and medical supplies to the area can help slow the outbreak.
It requires almost perfection in how well we manage, and any lapse can result in the infection of a healthcare worker or the spread of infection to a new community.
That perfection is almost impossible in the DRC. Armed groups have displaced about 6 million people since 2022, putting the DRC in the top 5 countries with internally displaced people. President Donald Trump said he had ended the conflict in December, but so far the fighting has continued. Even without the conflict, hospitals may not have adequate equipment or space. And then there are cultural factors too.
One of the ways that Ebola spreads most explosively is by traditional burial practices, where people, out of love and devotion, will wash, touch, sometimes kiss the body of the deceased.
The virus spreads through direct contact with bodily fluids and is at its most contagious right before and immediately after someone dies. But that burial tradition is deeply ingrained in culture. And last month, people burned an Ebola treatment center in the DRC to retrieve a body for burial. Other treatment centers have been attacked as well.
The level of trust in government is very low, and change happens at the speed of trust. Trust is the one thing you can't surge in to a community during a crisis.
The African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that about 10% of the population believe the outbreak isn't real or that a vaccine is being kept from them. Right now, there is a vaccine for the more common Zaire strain of the virus, but not for the Bundibugyo virus. Daryl Falzerano is the principal scientist at the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization. About 10 years ago, he studied whether the Zaire vaccine could work for other Ebola strains in non-human primates.
And it turned out it did. It's about a 50% increase in survival. What you normally see with a matching vaccine is 100% protection.
That's where the research stopped, because outbreaks of Bundibugyo have been relatively small and rare. But Falzerano says that while a vaccine for Bundibugyo doesn't exist yet, the structure, research, and technology to fast-track one does. There are currently 3 in the works.
The timelines that are being stated right now is around 9 months.
For now, Johns Hopkins scholar Amish Adalja says this outbreak shouldn't cause anxiety for the general U.S. population, where we have access to state-of-the-art care facilities and equipment.
Even though Ebola finds it very hospitable in certain circumstances to spread, like it did in West Africa, it wasn't really able to do much outside of that outbreak zone. It didn't find other parts of the world hospitable.
There was no vaccine for Ebola during that outbreak, and more than 20,000 people contracted it and 10,000 died. This outbreak is currently bigger than the one in West Africa was at this stage, but it's still far behind in total cases and deaths. Adalja says the most important thing for global officials is to work through the trusted people on the ground. Resources and manpower will only help if citizens believe it's for their good. Reporting for World, I'm Mary Muncy.
Additional support comes from Ascend by Unbound, a real-world faith-centered college alternative for gap year, trades, and degree-seeking students. More at beunbound.us/world. From Asbury University, committed to the formation of students through discipleship, calling, and career preparation. asbury.edu. And from Nuggets of Wisdom, digital homeschool curriculum, unit studies, and educational resources for growing minds. nuggets-of-wisdom.com.
Coming up next on The World and Everything in It, the end of a controversial justice fund. On Tuesday, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche answered questions about the Department of Justice's Anti-Weaponization Fund. It was designed to compensate victims of alleged Biden-era political targeting, but faced bipartisan opposition in Congress.
We are not moving forward with the fund, period.
Not moving forward ever.
Correct.
What's behind the rise and fall of the fund? World's Harrison Waters reports from Washington.
Attorney Brett Tolman was getting calls multiple times a day after the DOJ announced the fund in May.
The individuals wanting to know, what can I do? Because this is what happened to me or a loved one of mine, and this is what they did.
Tolman is a former United States attorney for Utah and now chair of American Justice at the America First Policy Institute. The Anti-Weaponization Fund came out of a recent settlement between President Trump and the IRS in a case about Trump family tax records leaked to the media in 2020. While Trump sought $10 billion in damages, he settled for roughly $1.8 billion, but not for himself.
That was really just the mechanism to do what I think he all along wanted to do, and that was to somehow, while he's in charge of the executive branch, make amends to those who found themselves in the crosshairs unfairly and unlawfully by the Justice Department.
The plan was to compensate Americans targeted by the Biden administration with elevated misdemeanor and felony charges. A 5-member committee would review cases and award payments. While Vice President J.D. Vance told reporters all were welcome to apply, many wondered about one category in particular: January 6th Capitol protesters.
Should people that attacked the Capitol building and assaulted police officers, should they be eligible?
Vance said each case would be reviewed on its own merits.
If we think that somebody was unfairly prosecuted and deserves just compensation, then that's what this fund is going to exist to provide.
Some conservatives like Tolman saw the fund as an olive branch. Others saw something more self-serving. Paul Larkin is senior legal fellow at the think tank Advancing American Freedom.
The whole thing is rather a shady effort to try to get around the proposition that only when Congress has authorized money to be paid should it be paid.
Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche cited Obama-era cases where the government created a new process to settle lawsuits. Larkin says Blanche went too far by not requiring claimants to have a pending legal case against the government, just a legal claim stating he or she was a victim of lawfare.
You actually need to have suffered some harm in order to be able to bring a tort suit against anyone, including the United States.
Democrat lawmakers cried foul when the DOJ announced the fund, and some Republicans agreed. Senate Majority Leader John Thune delayed votes on funding for immigration enforcement agencies, saying the White House first needed to answer questions about the fund. Then on Friday, a district judge blocked the fund while a lawsuit by former Capitol Hill police officers continues. The DOJ later said it would abide by that order. Reporters asked Majority Leader Thune about it on Tuesday.
Speaker Johnson just told us it's his understanding that this fund is off the table. So is that your understanding as well after speaking with the Acting Attorney General?
That is correct.
While the anti-weaponization fund is effectively dead, Tolman says the DOJ still has a way to make good on the president's promise to rectify alleged political prosecutions.
There was a weaponization group that was organized when Trump came in, last year.
So far, that DOJ working group has published just one report on the prosecution of pro-lifers under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, or FACE Act. Tolman says the DOJ can use existing powers to dismiss cases, even where defendants have already been sentenced.
Many of those right now could be dismissed under Rule 48, which I would promise you, in a lot of cases, mean far more than any compensation would be to, get that case dismissed and a clean slate for folks who were unfairly and improperly targeted.
While the DOJ has not appealed the court order blocking the fund, it still has a court date for next Friday. Reporting for World, I'm Harrison Waters in Washington.
Up next, protecting vulnerable women. Later this month, the public comment period will close on a new policy proposed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
The policy would keep men who identify as women out of women-only homeless shelters. While the proposed rule has faced severe criticism in the public comments section, experts and legal minds say it will provide much-needed safety to women who need care. World's Josh Schumacher has more.
In Anchorage, Alaska, Downtown Hope Center, a religious organization, provides shelter and resources to homeless people.
They serve everyone. They provide meals, clothing, showers, and resources to everyone who walk through their doors daily.
That's ADF, or Alliance Defending Freedom, attorney Michaela Culbertson. ADF represented the religious organization after it ran into legal trouble in 2018 when it declined to provide shelter to a man identifying himself as a woman. The man violated shelter admissions policies by showing up drunk, and after check-in time had ended. The shelter declined to admit him, but did pay for a ride to the hospital since he was also injured. The city investigated the center for alleged discrimination after the man claimed he was turned away based on his gender identity. The city said that the center needed to allow men who claimed they were women to stay in the parts of the shelter reserved for women. After a year-long court battle, the city finally agreed that Downtown Hope Center could keep men out of women-only shelter facilities. Now, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, aims to ensure all homeless shelters receiving government funding follow the same rules as Downtown Hope Center. Culbertson explains.
So the proposed rule would remove the phrase gender identity from about 50 federal housing regulations, and it would restore biological sex as the standard.
HUD explained that its proposed regulations superseded any local laws that conflicted with it, and that any homeless shelters that didn't comply would lose access to federal funding. For homeless women, this provides much-needed protection.
It means that they can seek shelter knowing that they will not be forced to share intimate spaces with a man. Women deserve safety, privacy, and dignity. This proposed regulation gives shelters the clear authority to provide that.
But some homeless and housing-focused advocacy groups have criticized HUD's proposed policy. The National Alliance to End Homelessness says vulnerable individuals shouldn't have to be subjected to invasive searches to determine their biological sex, searches that the group says could leave those people feeling demeaned, threatened, and traumatized. But federal law says shelters may make reasonable requests to find out someone's sex, and some shelter directors say that process is pretty simple. Bram Begonia is the CEO of the Bay Area Rescue Mission.
Well, one question, what were you at birth? Right? It's just that simple, right?
Begonia says when someone lies, the truth tends to come out. When that happens, staff members move that person to a different part of the facility. Begonia says there's a long list of individuals that can complicate matters for shelter staff. Registered sex offenders, people who repeatedly start fights, or individuals with ankle monitors. But on the issue of separate sex spaces, the new policy would make it easier for shelters to keep homeless women safe. It would also allow homeless shelters like Downtown Hope Center in Anchorage to stay loyal to their religious beliefs. Public comment on the HUD policy ends later this month. After that, it's up to the department to decide whether it will abandon the new policy, revise it, or implement it as proposed. Reporting for World, I'm Josh Schumacher.
New Yorkers are used to strange sights, but even by Big Apple standards, this one was weird. Security cameras in Queens captured 3 people stopping in the middle of the night decked out in hip waders, protective gear, and headlamps. Then they pried open a manhole cover. One by one, they climbed into the city sewer. The last person paused and sealed the cover shut. Now, police say similar groups have been spotted entering and exiting sewers in Brooklyn as well. Some appeared to spend hours underground. Now, no damage has been found and no arrests have been made. City officials stress that entering the sewers is illegal and dangerous. But whatever these people were looking for, they apparently thought it was worth enduring the odor to find it. Ew. It's the world and everything in it.
Today is Thursday, June 4th. Thank you for turning to World Radio to help start your day. Good morning. I'm Myrna Brown.
And I'm Mary Reichard. Coming next on The World and Everything in It, faith under extreme pressure. 2 years ago, astronaut Barry Wilmore began his last mission in space. The mission did not go as planned, culminating with an unexpected 9-month stay on the International Space Station before returning safely to Earth.
What spiritual disciplines sustain a believer in a high-risk technical environment? World's Todd Vision has our story.
A day into Boeing Starliner's first manned flight, Barry Wilmore calmly reported a problem. The computer display was flashing as he and his fellow astronaut were conducting tests before docking with the International Space Station.
The nav FLIR, the white converged, and then 4.02, then inbound fly around, and then the destination A and B in the ARD region, not all flashing at the same time. Different ones would flash at different times.
250 miles below the orbiting spacecraft, NASA engineers quickly began assessing the implications of Wilmore's observations.
Just moments ago, we had confirmation from Mission Control. A second reaction control system maneuvering jet has now failed. Mission Control has told Butch Wilmore, the commander, to hold Starliner at 260 meters from the station.
Engineers in Houston began hot-firing thrusters to bring them online again. But Wilmore knew it was worse than it sounded. 5 of the 6 thrusters used to maneuver the capsule as it approaches the space station had malfunctioned. Without a fix, they couldn't dock. If they couldn't dock,
there is not another option. Because if we don't dock, I don't think we can do a deorbit burn and get back to Earth. So we have to dock.
It took roughly 2 hours to assess the problem. Wilmore manually pointed the capsule to maintain its orbit and keep its navigation sensors tracking so they could return to autocontrol before docking.
The reason I was able to maintain control is because I had lived rendezvous and docking and orbital mechanics.
That means he'd studied how to maneuver 2 objects flying in close proximity, and he spent more time than required in the simulator, often going in on Saturday mornings at 6. Now, that training was paying off.
My control inputs, what I'm putting into the system, the thrusters, how that will affect the orbital mechanics, I'm thinking through all this in my mind.
Wilmore forged his calm under pressure mentality before he lifted off on his first space mission. He spent 8 years as a Navy test pilot, routinely testing airplanes' limits. On one flight, in an FA-18, the jet began to stall when not enough air was moving over its wings.
Where it's departed normal flight, and it starts to fall back to Earth, and it will go kind of a falling leaf, left wing down, right wing down, left wing down, right wing down, kind of like a leaf kind of fluttering through the air.
Wilmore let his less experienced co-pilot run the checklist while he monitored the altimeter.
And of course, the procedure is neutralize, stick full forward. That's the quick, and you just hold it. Because if you don't, you'll fall in the leaf all the way to the ground, which is not good.
As they approached the altitude where they would have to bail out, Wilmore took control of the stick.
So I grabbed it, and I went through the procedures, and it didn't come out initially, but eventually did right before we hit 10,000 feet and recovered.
Wilmore also flew against Iraqi air defenses in Desert Storm. Each test flight and combat mission resulted in more confidence. It grew even more when he began to seriously study God's Word.
When it says, fear not, it says, don't be anxious. It doesn't mean that I'm never anxious. It means that I know there's a path to not be anxious if I follow the path that he has outlined. And I believe it to the core of my being.
Wilmore is also quick to say he was able to stay focused on his mission, whether in space or in the cockpit, because he's not distracted by life's bigger questions, like what will happen when we die.
There is no price for me to pay. And that comfort, that contentment in stressful situations, I can block everything out and go forward with whatever the situation I'm dealing with, because if the Lord takes me if to that level, I'm ready.
Before pilots perform their first solo flight, they spend hundreds of hours in books, flying with an instructor, and preparing for every what if. Wilmore has approached the Bible with the same discipline.
Just like when you're a student pilot, it's repetition.
Repetition.
Repetition, repetition, repetition. You learn it by going over it and going over it and going over it. It's the same thing with God's Word.
The stakes were never greater for Wilmore than when he was in space, and he still remembers the charge he received as a new astronaut 26 years ago.
Your task as an astronaut is to know everything and perform it well. You can't know everything and perform it well, but that's the goal. And it's the same thing as in the life of a believer. Why would you accept being an average Christian when great is attainable? And God calls us to that.
Wilmore says astronauts have confidence, in part because they don't just prepare until they can get it right. They prepare until they think they can't get it wrong. But Wilmore's confidence extends even beyond that, to trusting in God's sovereignty no matter the emergency. Reporting for World, I'm Todd Vision in Houston, Texas.
Good morning. This is The World and Everything in It from listener-supported World Radio. I'm Myrna Brown.
And I'm Mary Reichard. For years, debates over transgender procedures on minors centered on legislatures, school boards, and questions of public policy.
Now, a growing number of disputes are finding their way into courtrooms. World commentator Daniel Suhr says that shift may tell us something important about where the debate goes next.
Within days of one another, Texas and New Jersey offered two very different answers to the same question. Who should be held responsible when a child undergoes irreversible transgender procedures and later regrets it? In Texas, state officials and the U.S. Department of Justice recently announced a $10 million settlement with Texas Children's Hospital. The settlement holds the hospital accountable for its role in transgender procedures on minors. Whistleblower Dr. Eitan Haim reacted.
This is the first legal victory we've all been waiting for since the Trump administration came into office. Yeah, you've had investigations, you've had indictments, but nothing has ever gone to the finish line. This is the first one. And the other important thing too is that the reason it's at the finish line is not because of powerful people or a lot of money. It's because of like a handful of people who refuse to give up, who are willing to work hard, be strategic, stick to their values, and put their faith in God above all else.
Accountability. That may define the next phase of this debate. In New Jersey, though, lawmakers are moving in the opposite direction. They are advancing legislation designed to shield hospitals and providers from lawsuits and other legal consequences related to so-called gender-affirming care. Those two developments may signal where this issue is headed. For years, the debate focused on whether these procedures should be allowed at all. Now a different question is emerging. What happens afterward? And concerns about accountability are not limited to conservative states. A New York jury recently awarded roughly $2 million to a plaintiff who argued that transgender procedures amounted to medical malpractice. Whatever one thinks of that verdict, it demonstrates that ordinary citizens serving on juries are beginning to wrestle with these cases. That matters because the people bringing these lawsuits are not political abstractions. They are young men and women who say they underwent life-altering interventions as minors and now believe that they were harmed. As more of those cases reach the courts, pressure will grow to determine who bears responsibility. Parents certainly make medical decisions for their children. That is an important aspect of family authority and liberty. But the state also has a legitimate interest in protecting minors from harm. The U.S. Supreme Court recently reaffirmed that principle in its decision upholding Tennessee's restrictions on transgender procedures on children, bringing us back to accountability. Much as critics of abortion often argue that responsibility should rest first with providers rather than with patients, critics of pediatric transgender procedures argue similarly, that doctors and medical institutions should answer for the procedures they promoted. New Jersey's proposal points in a different direction. The bill would not simply permit these procedures. It would make it harder to hold providers legally responsible for them. The central question is no longer merely whether transgender procedures for minors should continue. Increasingly, the question is whether the institutions that promoted those procedures have to answer for the harm they have caused. Texas and New Jersey have offered two very different answers. The rest of the country will likely have to answer soon as well. For World, I'm Daniel Suhr.
World's June Giving Drive continues. If you've already made up your mind about supporting World this year, why not just go ahead and take care of it today? It's easy and secure to give online at wng.org/donate. Tomorrow, it's Culture Friday with John Stonestreet, and Colin Garbarino has a review of the 1970s historical musical, 1776. That and more tomorrow. I'm Mary Reichard.
And I'm Myrna Brown. The world and everything in it comes to you from World Radio. World's mission is biblically objective journalism that informs, educates, and inspires. The Bible says, "And disagreeing among themselves, they departed after Paul had made one statement. The Holy Spirit was right in saying to your fathers through Isaiah the prophet, 'Go to this people and say, you will indeed hear, but never understand, and you will indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them.' Therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen. Verses 25 through 28 of Acts 28. Go now in grace and peace.